Welcome back to Crypto PTSD. My name's Dustin, and I'll be your host. Tonight, I'm going to be having this very special guest on. We're going to be having Al on, and his encounter, he got to watch this creature for several minutes from 50 yards away, and there are so many unique details I've never heard before. So look forward to that tonight, guys. Before we get there, though, I want to remind everybody that if you like what you hear from Crypto PTSD, hit that subscribe button. Not only will it help me, it helps you guys out. It'll send you notifications every time we upload our new show. I'm trying to get back to weekly shows every Monday. And if you're not getting a notification, there should be a little bell right by the subscribe button. Make sure you have your notifications turned on. Also, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, please send me an email. My email address is cryptoptsd@gmail.com. That's CRYPTOPTSD, all lowercase, no spacing, @gmail.com. And if you send me an encounter, please put encounter in the subject line. That way I can separate out your email from all the others. Alright guys, before we get started tonight, there's one other thing I want to talk about, and that's the format for my show. So I had somebody leave a comment in I believe it was the last episode, and I believe their name, I hope they haven't left the show yet, was Ermin Case or Erwin Chase, I can't remember. This person they made a statement, and I want to thank them for that because they weren't a jerk about it. It was a concern that was very serious to them, and they did it in the right manner. You know, so many times we hear about trolls and people just being jerks. So this person, even though they had, some constructive criticism, they weren't being a jerk about. So I want to thank that person for making that comment and telling me something that they didn't like about my show. In a good way. I appreciate that, and that's what makes the show better. And to answer their question, in my show, I was working on how to format it, how to put things in order, how I liked it, and I kind of stumbled upon, asking brief questions and then just letting the guests talk and then asking my questions at the end. And I do that because some people only like to hear the guest talk. They don't like to hear anything from the host. And so for those people, that they have that. They have, just a little bit of me in the beginning and then the guest talking. But on the same note, I want to ask questions and details, and I get what this person was saying. They were saying I was asking too many, and they're right. There is a fine line there. There's a difference between too many and then being a good detailed interviewer. And I did. I asked too many in the last one. There was a reason, though. I was trying to get a certain detail because I wanted to find out how the log was spinning. So I was trying to see if he saw it. But anyways, guys, I'm still learning here, and my format, and just like in tonight's show, is going to be the guests talking. When they get done telling their story, I'll have them retell it and ask questions throughout that. That way it kind of makes everybody happy. Also, whenever I ask these questions, and even though I'm kind of asking questions that they either don't know the question to, but they're very detailed questions. So what it does is it gets the person to start thinking. A lot of times, as you'll see tonight, it brings up more details that they had forgotten about. So that's the other reason I do it. But I'm still learning on that fine line, and where I run into an issue at is when people have multiple encounters, because I want to stop them after each one and ask the questions, both for them and for the listeners. That way it makes sense instead of going through 3 encounters and then having to, try to start from the beginning again. So, hope everybody will give me a little bit of leeway here as I continue to get things figured out. But I want to say thank you to all the listeners, everyone who makes comments. I read them. I know I don't reply to all. That's because I've been traveling a lot lately. But I want to thank you to everybody. I love you guys. You're the reason I do the show. And, I want to put one out once a week again for everybody. So I know this intro's been pretty long, so let's go ahead and talk about what's going on tonight. Al, I'd like to thank you for coming on the show.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on.
Al, why don't you tell us what you knew about the subject when this happened?
Okay. Well, I was a kid growing up in the '70s, so my first real exposure to, you know, Bigfoot was the In Search Of episode with Lim Nimoy, and that was on when I was just a kid, and I watched that, and it just totally fascinated me. The Bigfoot episode and the Loch Ness monster episode, and so I've always kind of been into the crypto thing ever since I heard about it when I was a kid. So just basically just watching that show and what little books there were in the early to mid '70s in the school library. I tried to read everything I could about, Bigfoot, the Yeti, and Loch Ness Monster, just because I was one of those kids that just was fascinated by that kind of thing. So I just knew really about the Patterson Gimlin, and then the famous episode where the miners, the Sasquatch were throwing rocks down on the miners. Those are the two stories that stuck in my head as a kid and really got me hooked on the subject of Bigfoot.
Now, the area where this happened, I want you to be as specific or as vague as you feel comfortable being. But would you tell us a little bit about where this happened? And you can be as vague as the U.S. or the central U.S. Or you can go down to, giving down a mountain range or whatever you feel comfortable with.
Sure. My encounter happened in the hills and hollers of Kentucky. Where we were at was way it's close, pretty close to the Mammoth Cave area, where there's a lot of chain of caves all over the area. So it was out in the middle of the mountains in Kentucky.
Okay, well, I'm from Missouri, and we kind of share a landscape there, knowing what hollers are. But would you mind explaining what a holler is to those who may not know?
Sure. A holler is you just imagine a flat field, and then you go up. I wouldn't call it a mountain per se, but you go up a steep hill. It kind of flattens off. Then you look down, and down below it, you've got vegetation and maybe creeks and things for a little ways, and then it goes back up to another little hill, and down in that little area there is what a holler is.
Okay, yeah, it's funny because I think of my grandfather and my great uncles and hunting with them, and they'd always say, "Well, over there in that yonder there, in that holler there, ding."
Yep.
Spitting their
Yep.
tobacco.
Yep.
And if you weren't from the area, that you had no idea what they were saying. So,
Yep.
okay, well, your story, I'm sure everybody's sick of me talking already. So let's just go ahead and get into it, man, and try to remember as many details as possible, and then try to explain the landscape as best as possible. And then I'm just going to let you take it away. And I've kind of heard yours before, so I'm probably going to be able to let you go all the way through it. Once we get all the way through it, if you don't like the questions, you can stop listening there, to everyone listening out there. But if you like the questions, that's where I'll have them go back through, and I'll have them start from the beginning and tell a story very quickly, and I'll stop them at the points and ask them questions. So, all right, Al, take it away, man.
All right. It was in the summer of 1982, probably about mid-July. I have had some family that owned a lot of property in the hills and hollers of Kentucky. My grandfather, some uncles, some cousins that all lived around that area. It was all private property. So a lot of times during the summer, I would go and stay for a few weeks at a time and visit with my grandpa. And I had a few cousins my age, and we would just kind of hang out. And I grew up living in the city in Indiana, so when I'd go to Kentucky, it was my time to kind of be able to experience doing things out in the country, hunting and swimming in ponds and fishing and doing things I normally wouldn't get to do. So it was really a treat for me to get to go down there and stay. So it was about mid-July 1982. I was getting ready to go into my probably sophomore year of high school. So I was probably 14, 15 years old. me and a cousin that was about 2 or 3 years younger than me, there was an area that we liked to go to that we called Tom Sawyer's Island. And I don't know if you've ever seen the old children's movie Tom Sawyer, but Tom and Huckleberry Finn went and hid out on an island when the Injun Joe was after him to kill him in the story. So it was just a nice little island in the middle of a big lake out in property, and it was probably 50 yards off the main shore. And we would either swim or take a little raft out to the island, and we had hammocks set up, a fire pit, and all that. So we wanted to go out to Sawyer's Island and hang out for the day, do some fishing. The area where we were going to go was really remote, away from where all the homes of my family were. So we had to, it was probably a 10, 15 miles away through brush, through hills, hollers. It was a long haul. And what we normally do is my family had horses, and they were real particular about taking the horses out because they were expensive, and there were a lot of ways. It was a lot of steep landscape, and they were afraid the horses may break a leg or get injured, so they would never let us ride the horses to go out in that area. But what they would do is they would let us ride a couple of the mules that they had on the property. And I don't know if you've ever rode a mule or not, but it's a little bit different than riding a horse. But they are sure-footed, and they can make it up those hills and hollers, and it beats the heck out of walking. So we grabbed a couple of mules, and we took off for the day. We packed a boom box, some fishing poles, some water jugs, and we took off. We got there probably midday around 3 o'clock, fished from the bank for a little while. It was really too hot for the fish to be biting. So we were like, hey, let's take a swim and then swim out on the island and just kind of hang out. So we swam for a little while, swam up to the island. Like I said, was about 50 yards, about the half a distance of the football field from the main land there. And we swam out to the island, hung out for a little while, just shot the breeze, talked, and lay around, and we both just ended up falling asleep under the shade tree. We fell asleep for a little while. I think I was the first one to woke up because I heard a commotion. I heard mules braying and kicking and just causing a real huge commotion over on the shore. So I kind of sat up and looked, and when I did, I saw the mules moving around, and we had them tied up to a tree, and they were, just trying to get loose and kicking their back legs. And it's just, I'd never seen them acting like that, unless there was a snake or something around, which is what my first thought was, is maybe there's a snake or something over there. So before I got to actually stand up and get a better look, all of a sudden out of the corner of my eye, I saw what looked to be a person, maybe 10, 15 feet away from the mules on the bank. And by this time, my cousin had woke up, and he was sitting right there looking, and I kind of looked over to him and was just like, shh, and there's tall weeds and things up. So we were kind of, hid in the vegetation there on the island. And we look over, and when my eyes adjusted and everything in the sunlight, I noticed that whatever it was squatting down, had its back to us, and was kind of going through the tackle box that we had on the shore. And it was picking things out of the tackle box, and it was looking at them, throwing them down, throwing them away. And I got to looking, and as I got to looking, I noticed that this thing was, it didn't look like a man. It looked a lot whiter than a man. Now, growing up, my father used to take me to a lot of Cincinnati Bengals football games. And back in the day, after the games in Cincinnati, at least, in Riverfront Stadium, you could actually walk across the field, walk through the tunnel, and stand outside the players' dressing rooms. And when they were done doing whatever, their families would be waiting out there, press, they'd come out, and you could literally walk right up to them and get an autograph if they were nice enough to do so, or shake their hand. And a lot of the players were friendly and greeted the fans like that. One of my favorite players on the Bengals at the time was a lineman named Anthony Munoz. Anthony Munoz was about 6'6", about 330 pounds. So I'd met him many times, shook his hand, had my picture taken with him several times, so I knew how big of a man he was. So the first thing I did when I actually started noticing the size, the width of this thing, at the time I thought it was a man, I compared him to Anthony Munoz. So, and he just dwarfed him in size. I mean, it was unbelievable how wide this thing was. So at that point in time, I noticed that whatever it was wasn't wearing any clothes. What was on it was hair. I don't want to say fur, but I would say hair. I could tell enough that it had shorter hair all over its body, and then the back of its head it actually had hair, and then it had longer hair on its head hanging down on its back, and the hair that was on its head and hanging down on its back looked lighter than the reddish brown color that was on its body, almost like it had been bleached by the sun. So the more we started looking at it, we both knew then that it was either something we'd never seen before, or it was someone playing a joke on us. We weren't really sure, but we were both really quiet. Well, the mules continued to just really, I mean, they were freaking out. And it seemed to irritate whatever this thing was. So it got irritated, threw the tackle box down, and then it stood up. And when it stood up, that's when my blood ran cold. And it was huge. I mean, I can still vividly, the picture of that thing standing up in my mind will never go away. It'll be forever etched in my mind. My cousin immediately started to tremble and shake, and tears were running down his cheeks. He was scared to death. I was scared to death. I was shaking. It stands up, and then it turns around and faces the mules. And I thought it was going to go and kill the mules. So when it stands up and turns around to look at the mules, I get a better look at it. I get a profile look at it. And at that point in time, I realized I was trying to just take as much in as I possibly could, because I knew I had to tell my grandpa what we'd seen and what was going on. So I tried to take in as much as I could from where I was at. And I know that the palms of the hand and the skin on the face, what I seen was like it wasn't a white Caucasian color. It wasn't a black color. It was more of like a really deep tan color, almost like someone with a real dark tan. It was definitely tan, and a dark tan. The palms of the hand had no fur or hair that I seen, and on the face itself, around the eyes and around the mouth, there was no hair. It didn't open its mouth that I seen, and all I could know about the eyes is they were very, very dark, almost black. I didn't see any whites of the eyes. They were very dark and very black. The nose was kind of pudged and kind of pressed down. It wasn't a distinct nose like, you or I may have. It was kind of pressed down. It had distinguished brow line coming out around the eyebrow area that protruded out a little bit. What I said before is, to me, from the profile that I seen, it looked like almost like a Neanderthal man. The pictures you see of the Neanderthal man, it kind of had a Neanderthal man type of look. It definitely did not look like a monkey or a gorilla. It was more human-like in the face. Its head wasn't super coned. but it did have but it wasn't round. It's sort of halfway in between cone and round shape. But this thing was huge. So it starts to walk over to the mules, and when it does, it cracks its head on a branch of the tree where the mules were standing at. And it hits this branch, and the whole tree shakes. And it obviously angered this thing even more than it seemed to already be. So it reaches up and it grabs the branch that it hits its head on and just rips it off the tree and throws it on the ground. And then it proceeded to continue to walk over to the mules. And about the time it got over there to them, and they were still kicking and braying and everything like that, we heard the loudest, most intense scream you've ever, I can't describe. It was just very loud. It just ran through our entire body. It was so loud, but it was in the distance, across the other side of the lake, in the tree line in the forest on the other side of the lake. Came from that area, but it was so loud, you could almost feel it in my soul. It just rattled us. As soon as that scream came out, the creature turned around and looks in that direction, and then it takes off walking in that direction, away from the mules, away from the tackle box, and it starts walking around the lake, heading toward the tree line. It was a pretty big sized lake, so it was just following the shore around the lake, and we watched it. And from what I remember, it was moving very fast. It wasn't running, but it was moving very fast. It was walking upright. It was not walking on its knuckles, or it wasn't walking on all fours. It was just making huge strides across the lake and disappeared into the tree line on the other side of the lake. After that, my cousin, who again was a couple years younger than me, I didn't know if I was going to be able to get him to even get up. That's how scared and upset that he was. And he just kept saying, that thing is going to get us. It's going to get us. It's going to get us. And I had to try to take control of the situation, since I was the oldest, and say, I knew we needed to get the hell out of there and get back home. So we didn't have any weapons on us, a couple pocket knives, but we didn't see it anymore. And finally we laid there in the tall grass for a really long time, thinking, and I kept watching to make sure, because I was afraid that two of them were going to come back, or more than one was going to come back for the mules. That's what was worrying me more than anything. So finally it started getting dark, and it was dusk, and here we were still on the island, and I told my cousin, I said, listen, we've got to get back. We're not going to make it back before dark, but we got to get out of this general area and off this knob and through the next couple of hollers before darkness really sets in. So we kind of got in the water and just, belly crawled, just swam very, very slowly back the 50 yards to the shore, got the mules, left everything there that was on the, toolbox, a tackle box, fishing poles, boom box, everything we took with us, we just left, grabbed the mules by the reins, walked them out probably about a mile before we actually got on them to ride them. And then once we got clear, the whole time we kept looking back to make sure nothing was behind us. And then we, like I said, when you ride a mule doesn't go really fast, but we rode those mules home as fast as we possibly could, as fast as a mule would go. And honestly, if you want my honest opinion, I think the mules are in a hurry to get home too. I really do. So we get back home, and it was a pretty long journey and a pretty frightful one. because darkness fell on us, and every time the wind would blow, a tree branch would crack or anything. We thought that whatever that thing was coming to get us. So we make it home. We go in, and as soon as we got in, the grown-ups knew something was wrong. I mean, my cousin was petrified. He was still in tears. I know I was probably all jacked up with adrenaline and everything. So my aunt just kept saying to him, his mother, what's the matter? What's the matter? What happened? What happened? And he wouldn't talk about it. And my grandpa came in there and he's like, what'd you guys do? What'd you get into? What happened? And I said, we were out at the island, and we seen something. We seen a monster, because that's the only way I could describe what I've seen, is a monster. I said, we seen a big monster. And he's like, yeah. He said, he saw a creek monster. And come to find out after talking, later with him and some of the older people around that area, he had grew up around that area, and he had his own sightings with creatures of that nature. And every time that they managed to see him, it would always be around water, because not only were there was the big lake there that was probably 10, 15 miles away, but there was a creek that ran through the property, and several small ponds that horses and cows would use as watering holes. And they were all full of fish. Even the little water holes were full of bluegill and bass and catfish. So it was very, fish and vegetation, apple trees and things, very plentiful around that area. So he had his own encounters over the years, so he knew that those things existed. So he tried to calm us down by telling us that he believed us. And of course, our older cousins, who were a lot older than us, they were making fun of us and laughing at us, and telling us that we were just seeing things and so on and so forth. But that was my experience, except for the very next day we got with one of my older cousins, and he said, let's go. We told the whole story. He said, let's go and see if we can see any footprints, see if we can see him again, whatever. So he took, his mother was like a seamstress. He took one of those really long cloth tape measures that like people use to measure your inseam and things with him. And we took back off. Now, my youngest cousin, who was with me at the time, wouldn't go back. He would not have anything to do with going back. So a few of the other ones, this time we had a shotgun, rifle. We took some weapons with us, and went back up there early. And we got there, we really couldn't see any type of footprint, because it was tall grass. And you step in tall grass, and especially around a pond or lake, it'll come back up again. So there's really no type of footprints. But what I did while I was there, what we did notice is that the branch that the creature hit its head on, it had reached up and grabbed it, broke it off, threw it down. The branch that it threw down was on the ground. I would walk over to it and could tell that was the one. It was a clean break. Look up the tree. Okay, I see the one it came off of, where it came off of, clean break there. I picked the branch up that it had threw, and I'm 6'2" and about 250, and was probably about that then, too. And I couldn't get my hand around the branch. It was pretty wide in diameter. But what we did do is when I told my cousin, that's the branch it hit its head on, he said, hey, well, let's measure from that branch to the ground and see how tall it was, which was a good idea. And we did. And the measurement we got from the branch to the ground was 8 foot 5 inches. And that, I mean, you know, a lot of people's like, you know, bull. But, you know, my whole thing is this. I would have no reason to, you know, to BS anybody about it. You know, we saw what we saw. The only thing I could tell anyone, I read a lot, and I see a lot of these posts in a lot of these Bigfoot groups. A lot of people like to call them forest people and leave food out for them, and they're our soul brother. All I know I don't know if there's different species of these things. I have no idea, but all I can say is this. What I saw that day was a monster. It wasn't a furry little creature that I want to give apples to. It was a monster, straight out of a nightmare. And I would never go on a Bigfoot expedition. I would never go on a camp out looking for Bigfoot. Last thing in the world I would ever want to do, and I'm 50 years old, is run into something like that ever again. You know, there's just no way. My cousin, on the other hand, he suffered very traumatic, had very traumatic issues over that sighting, that encounter. He had to undergo therapy. He would never go into the woods again. Even as a man, he would never talk with me about it and discuss the encounter that we had. He wouldn't let his kids join the Cub Scouts because he would never let them near the woods. If there was a place, even like, you know, big, you know, national parks and things, he wouldn't go near any place that was wooded. And as soon as he was old enough to move off the knob, he moved as far away from the country and the woods as he could possibly get. And it wasn't until just a couple of weeks ago that I connected with him, and we talked a little bit, and he actually opened up and discussed the encounter for the very first time since then with me. Since 1982, we talked about it, and he remembered some things that I didn't remember, as far as you know, what it looked like, what it smelled like.
Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. He told me what he remembered was during the time we were, you know, just observing, that he smelled a very foul smell, that smelled almost like, you know, rotten meat, or rotten meat and garbage. He said it was very putrid, almost made him sick. And he said it was definitely coming from the shoreline. And he said that he also remembered that the hair on this thing was probably, 2 or 3 inches thick, and that it was, he said that he remembered, he said it was red. He said it was red hair, almost like an orangutan. He said, and then the hair that was around on its head and coming back on its neck was a dark brown with blonde streaks in it, which I do remember the light color, but I don't remember it being blonde streaks. But he said it was blonde streaks. And he also said that when it walked, he said that it would its gait. He said that when it walked, its knees bent a lot more than what a person's knees would bend. So he obviously was taking things in that I wasn't taking in. At the time, I was just taking in the fact that it's getting away from us, and that's keep going that direction, buddy, because that's the direction I want you to go, away. But those are the things that he remembered most. And he also said that the face, when it turned around, we got a profile view. He said that it had the coldest, darkest, most evil eyes that he has ever seen. He said that he still has nightmares of those eyes looking at those eyes, and that he still to this day, when it gets dark out at night, he pulls the blinds down so nothing can look in at him. I mean, it really affected him and messed him up really bad. But that was my one, that was my encounter, the thing that really made me believe, and that really it shook me up after all these years. And like I said, to this day I would never join any type of group or anything that had plans on going camping and going out in the darkness and trying to search one of these things out. I have no desire to do that whatsoever.
Absolutely. And real quick there, Al, just want to say to those who are listening that only like the encounters and don't like to hear me talking, this would be the point where you're going to want to sign off. But before you do, I want to remind you guys that this will be the normal format for my show. Some encounters I can't wait till the end because they're different ones, so I have to question in the middle. But I want to thank you guys for listening, and also remind you to hit that subscribe button if you hadn't already, and we'll see you guys on the next show. For everyone else, sit back, and we're only about halfway through here. But to speak to that, Al, I agree with you 100%. You saw a monster, and that's the exact same way that I felt whenever I had my encounter. I did not believe it was a Bigfoot. I did not believe it was the Loch Ness Monster. What I knew was it was a monster, and that was it. And
Yep.
The eyes, your cousin talking about the eyes, is something that, because of my encounter, that's almost all I saw. I saw the outline whenever it stood up, squared up, and then, dropped back down. But there's been two different times that I've seen their eye shine, and whenever I watch videos online, that's something that, to me, it's hard to fake, and it's hard to fake well. And once you've seen their eyes, now I have not, my encounter compared to yours, I feel like a coward for the way it's affected me, but your encounter is amazing, and the detail that you just put into that. I mean, I do have some questions, but it was just absolutely amazing. Not wanting to join a Facebook group, why don't you talk about that a little bit? Because actually, the first time we had spoke, we talked about that. And do you want to go into that?
About not joining a Facebook group?
Yeah, the reasons outside of the fear.
Sure. I made them. I don't want to say mistake, but early on, I had, someone had, before the internet was real big, and things were just kind of, before I got into the internet, I guess, a guy had heard about my story through a friend. And he reached out and contacted me and said that he was a Bigfoot, Bigfoot enthusiast and researcher, and wanted to sit down and talk with me about my encounter. And we did, and I explained to him in more detail about where it happened. I thought it was all harmless, and the guy would just share it and maybe write it down or whatever. But what ended up happening is he got a whole bunch of people, with a whole bunch of, rowdy people with weapons, and they end up, trespassing on my family's property, and created quite a uncomfortable situation, with some of the elders, especially now that, all of us kids are grown. There are only older people living there on the knob, and they obviously didn't get a lot of company, and they certainly weren't expecting what showed up there. And the people were very rude and very confrontational. And I, at that point in time, of course, the police were called and weapons were pulled on both sides, and it was a very nasty face-off, so to speak. And at that point in time, I told myself that I would never publicly talk about my incident ever again. And actually, I hadn't until just a few years ago, when another gentleman contacted me, who I got to know before I even went into any detail, and trust him. But what I won't do is I won't ever go into detail about where exactly it's at, because I won't chance having that happen again. And that's why I'm kind of leery.
Absolutely. And just for everybody listening out there, don't worry. We're going to go back. We're going to get into these details, and I'm going to pull as many out as I can for you. But before we get there, Owl, the first time we talked, that was something that you had talked about. And, first of all, I'd just like to thank you for responding to the message that I sent you, and then for coming on the show. It means a lot. I have a show, but to you, I just kind of interrupted your life, and we spoke, and you decided to come on. So that really means a lot. So thank you for that.
Well, you're very welcome, and the reason I did is because after you did reach out and send the first email, I researched your show and listened to some episodes, and and liked what I heard, and thought would be a one of the things that I want to do is is I want awareness, people to be aware of just what's out there. A lot of people laugh it off, and a lot of people even say that know me, even people in my family will still accuse us of being liars, or over exaggerating, or just making up a story. They still do that, and I understand you're always going to have your skeptics like that. That's fine. I can accept that. But if I can just, if by listening to my story, if it just gets out to that one person or two people that realize that hey, I saw something similar to that, and I'm not crazy. There's other people seeing these things too. These things, there's obviously something to it. Honestly, in order for someone to be playing a prank on us on the day we were out there, they would have had to knew where we were going to be, and B, they would have had to went through a lot of trouble to have got there, brought a costume, and went through all the stuff they went through to have it play out like it did. There's just no way. There's just no way. It could be a prank. Just impossible. So I totally ruled that out. And trust me, even as right today, I really don't know what I saw. I think was a Sasquatch. It certainly goes by all the all the descriptions and things that I've read and seen. But like you said, all I can tell you is that it was some kind of monster.
Yep. And you were talking about bringing the awareness. There's many reasons I started my show, and that was one of them. And I don't know if I've used it on the show or not, but I always use the dog analogy. When it comes to the people who habituate or who claim to have relations with these creatures, that is not only amicable, but it's friendly, and they give me things and I give them things, and they allow me to do this and that. I'm not saying it's not true, but here's what I'm saying. If that's you, and you're telling the truth, and you're not delusional, you really are having these things happen. It's the same as when I was growing up as a kid. We had a Dalmatian. His name was Pete. He was the best dog My mom didn't like dogs. This is the only dog she's ever loved. I love this dog. We grew up in the country. He was a country dog. He went everywhere with us. But if somebody outside of the family came onto our yard, he would normally he would go and he would grab my sister by the back of her pants and he would drag her across the yard to wherever I was, and then he would just turn around and growl. And so I could tell you how I have a relationship with this dog and how awesome this dog is and how protective he is and how much he loves me. But if you go in my yard, I can't promise you that you're not going to get bit. Actually, there is a good chance you will, because he's an animal and he trusts me, but he doesn't trust anyone else. So it's the same thing. And when people put out that message of you need to habituate, you need to feed them, you need to go out and you need to give them the upper hand and just totally trust them, just like you. What I saw, it didn't do anything aggressive. At the sighting, I took other things to be aggressive, whether they were or not. That's, on my part, and on how I took it, didn't mean that's the way they meant it. But the thing that I saw was so big that if it got upset for 1 second, I have absolutely no doubt it could have picked up my truck. And something like that, you need to approach with a wide berth of respect and not try to treat it like a stray cat. So
Exactly.
you talking about what you saw was a monster. You don't ever want to see one again. And
Nope.
what it did, it was never aggressive directly towards you. A lot like,
No.
my deal. But it doesn't matter. I mean, you saw that thing snap that branch. You saw how big it was when it turned around. And I'm sorry, guys. I might cut a little bit of this out to shorten it up. But, those who habituate and do all those things, take it from somebody like Al here. Al had nothing to do with the subject. Wanted nothing to do with it. Had one of the best and most interesting encounters I've ever heard of. And today, he still wants nothing to do with it. Now, I'm sure somewhere inside him, maybe a roadside crossing or one in a zoo or something, he might be okay with. But these things are not to be toyed with. And as human beings, we are arrogant and we think that we can toy with things. And I'm guilty of that too myself here lately, going out and looking at their structures and stuff. But if you're out there and you're habituating, awesome for you. Awesome. Continue to do whatever makes you happy, but when it comes to new people, please keep that stuff to yourself. And like I said, Al, I might cut some of this out because I'm rambling here, but I think you hit the nail on the head talking about that, because of, when it got up and started walking towards those mules, what did you think? You think he was going to go pet it?
I thought,
say, calm down, guys. You
No.
okay?
no, I thought I was going to sit there and see the mules literally torn apart with its bare hands.
All right.
And if that would have happened, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. We may have very well died too, because I can't promise that I wouldn't have just broke down into a nervous breakdown, just started screaming and crying. My cousin was already almost comatose with fear. And if it would have done something aggressive like that to those mules, I may not be, sitting here talking to you right now.
Absolutely. And guys, after this, we'll get into the questioning and we'll get this moving on. But those of you that like to listen to the questioning, you get these special little tidbits. And I want to share a story with you, Al, and with the listeners that I don't think I've ever told before on the show. I may have, but I don't think so. About my own mule story. So you saying that you saw it walk over there and you thought it was going to kill it is very interesting to me, because I had something happen whenever I was 16. I had my car then, so yeah. I was 16 and I was living with my uncle, and Al, feel free to ask any questions when I get done here, because the listeners may be
Okay.
thinking the same ones. But we'll kind of let you be the interviewer for a second. But I was 16 years old, lived in this same area, so from where all my stuff happened, this is about 15 miles away. But I was living with my aunt and uncle, and their family owned this property. So his dad, his brother-in-law, his brother, they all lived on different pieces of this property, and they all had, I don't know, like 30, 40 acres. I can't remember. But anyways, his dad hated horses. My grandfather, I grew up with horses. I had a pony. He had a stables. And so I knew horses very well, but I didn't know mules. So I was always fascinated whenever I would go with him to his grandpa's, or to his dad's, my cousin's grandpa. And this guy, he loved mules and he hated horses so much that whenever he had a horse, he would put duct tape on its ears to try to make it stand up more like a mule's. He literally put duct tape on them. So he had this mule. It was a male. Had this mule that he would go out and he would feed, and they would come in. It's haulers, but they're fenced in, and so you can't just see in the open pasture. They're what that's like. And this mule didn't come up. Well, that wasn't unusual. Sometimes this mule didn't come up whenever he would call to feed. Second night and third night, this mule doesn't return. So he calls my uncle and his other son to come help him look for this mule. So they go walking out, and there's a little pond back there for the mules to drink, and the mule was dead, and it was standing in basically a mud pit. They walked up, and they were wondering, oh, did it die of old age or something? And it was an old mule. It was a young, healthy. It was one of his favorite mules, if I remember right. But anyways, go over there, and the only thing that's wrong with the mule is its neck is snapped, and it has 3 puncture marks behind its left jaw. Okay, so around it in the mud, because they ended up going and getting the backhoe, and when they got the backhoe, I was with them. I was 16, and I remember seeing the mud around the mule. They got the backhoe so they could carry them or bury the mule, but there were deep puncture marks in the mud from where you could tell the mule, because his dad's the one that said it. He goes, whatever it was, this mule was fighting it, and we're like, why? And he's like, look at these, and you could see it was like 1.5 feet, down into the mud where this thing was jumping up and down. And he sat there, and at the end of all of it, he ended up saying, well, there's only 2 things that could have done this. He said, one, there is a mountain lion in this tree here, and it smacked him and snapped its neck. And those 3 puncture marks are from the claws, and it hit it so hard that it snapped its neck. 2, somebody was out here, and this was in the wintertime. It was warm enough that there was mud. It wasn't frozen ground, but it was in the wintertime. I remember because he said, or somebody was back here in this pond gigging for frogs, and they hit my mule behind the jaw here, and that's because it looked like it was from a gig. I mean, it was just 3 puncture marks right behind the jaw. And then I remember my uncle saying, well, what broke its neck then? And he's like, well, I don't know. Maybe they got that gig stuck in there, and they were trying to get it out. And I remember at 16 looking at this mule, and you know how mules are. I mean, they are muscular animals, much more, in my opinion, than a horse. A mule is a much more athletic animal, in my personal opinion, and I loved horses. But this mule's neck was broken, and I remember because how it was laying there, it was laying on its side, and its neck was turned back the other way. So if it laying on its right side, and its face was facing behind it, because you could see the 3 gig marks, and it was completely snapped. And this mule's neck was massive. I don't know anything, any animal, even if there was a black bear that did it, there's no way it could have done that. But there were no prints that we noticed of any other animals in the mud. and the mule was jumping up and down because you could see it. And I now think that that was a Bigfoot that killed it. I think it grabbed it and was holding it by its head behind its jaw, and I think it broke its neck. Now, I don't know what they did to it before or after or why they did it, but I personally believe that that is what happened to that animal. And you talking about that mule, I wonder if maybe it was just making noise and they got sick of it and decided to kill it. I have no idea. But it was, I'll never forget that. And of course, at the time, it was just a mystery because I knew a mountain lion could not have broke that thing's neck, even if it was hanging on its mouth, swinging around. There's no way it could have broke its neck. And there's no way a human could break its neck with a gig or with just its hands. It's impossible because it was wintertime and there were no frogs in the pond. I mean, the frogs aren't out at that time. So that's
Right.
I just wanted to tell that. I thought that was something that was very interesting that I believe to this day that it was a Bigfoot. And of course, I didn't learn that until after everything happened. So,
Sure, and it certainly sounds like that you're right. From what you've said, it certainly sounds like that's a very good possibility. What happened
well, let me
to it?
ask you this: do you think that there was anything? Do you think a black bear or a mountain lion could break one of your mule's necks that you had there that day?
No,
Okay.
no, because like you said, and I'll agree with you 100%. Mule is a very athletic animal. A lot of people like to make fun of them, and they kind of a comical, jackass, comical. But mules, are very strong. They're very athletic. No, I don't think a black bear or a mountain lion or a human could have broke a full-grown mule's neck.
Now let me ask
No
you
way.
this: the creature you saw, do you think it could have broke either one of their necks?
Yes, easily.
Yep.
Easily. And I think that just like with my encounter, the only reason that this creature was walking over there toward him is because the noise and stuff was making it mad, was aggravating it, and it was annoying it. So I think it was going over to shut it up. And I think that probably is the same thing that happened to your uncle's mule.
Yep. And I know a lot of people probably don't know this, but mules will fight animals. So where horses will run from coyote, whatever. Not all horses, but most of them. A donkey won't, and a mule won't. They'll run. They'll run the pack of coyotes off. I've seen them do it. And this animal, I believe, was fighting or trying to run off whatever killed it, and it ended up losing. But all right, well, I wanted to share that with everybody. I hope everybody enjoyed that. Let's get back to your encounter here. I've got a few questions. If it's okay, why don't we just have you start back at the beginning and just kind of quickly hit on the big stuff and walk us back through, and I'll stop you. So go ahead and start from you guys are laying on the island and the mules are over there, and that's it. Let's just start right there. And then I'll just kind of stop you and ask you questions, and we'll just keep going through the story, okay? Well, guys, unfortunately, that's going to have to be it for part one. Please join us next week for part two, where he goes into the details of his encounter. And I've got to say, guys, I love encounters when it comes to watching Bigfoot without them knowing, because I think that tells us more about their behavior than going out and looking for them and them interacting with us does. I mean, watching Bigfoot behavior when they don't know humans around is true Bigfoot behavior. So you don't want to miss next week's show. Please join us for that. He has so many details that he didn't tell in his original encounter. So please join us for that. You do not want to miss it. I also want to remind everybody that if you like what you hear from Crypto PTSD, hit that subscribe button. It helps me out. It'll send you weekly notifications. And also, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, please send me an email. My email address is cryptoptsd@gmail.com. That's CRYPTOPTSD, all lowercase, no spacing, @gmail.com. If you're sending me an encounter, put encounter in the subject line. That way we can separate out your email from all the others. Well, everybody, I'd like to thank you for tuning in tonight. Everybody kept saying they like long shows. So instead of me editing this all down, I decided to make 2 shows. So make sure you join us next week for the details of his encounter. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.